Welcome to Read Your Comics. Today I'm looking at week 1 of the Age of Apocalypse. Thanks for joining me today. My name is Daryl. I am the host of Read Your Comics. Today I'm continuing my look at the 30th anniversary of the Age of Apocalypse. This is the week 1 books that would have come out approximately 30 years ago this week. Aside from X-Men Alpha, this is our first look at the X-Men of the new world, this new status quo that we're living in. Familiar villains are now heroes, and familiar heroes are now villains, and everything is topsy-turvy. And while X-Men Alpha introduced us to all of this, these are the books that kind of get the whole thing rolling. But before I jump into them, I just want to give a quick shout out to all the viewer support. If you're new to the channel, please go ahead and subscribe. I'm going to throw a graphic up right here. Do that now so you don't miss any future videos. Go ahead and like the video. Do that now. If you don't like it, uncheck it when you're done. And as always, comments are heavily encouraged. Let's look at this one first. Astonishing X-Men is, I believe this was the Uncanny X-Men spinoff book or rebranding of the book. Joe Mad has just been doing covers throughout Legion Quest, but he is back as the full-time illustrator on this. Got an awesome cover here. This Magneto looks great. I love it when his face is in shadow with just his teeth and eyes poking through. You get a good look at the majority of the team on a nice white cover, so it's not like dark and hard to make out characters. It's very striking. So definitely for a #1 issue, this jumps out. I love that it went back to the old style X on these two. I remember thinking when I was getting this as a teenager back in the day how cool that was. It was like retro. I love the, slanted X-Men traditional logo style, but I thought going back to this was just a really fun idea for this event that we're looking in. Enter now the Age of Apocalypse. As I said, Joe Mad is back on pencils. Scott Lobdell is the writer on this, and Mark Waid has been doing scripting throughout Legion Quest and even on X-Men Alpha, but he jumps off of this issue, so I don't think he returns until after the Age of Apocalypse is over. But in X-Men Alpha, they met Bishop, who had been time displaced, left over from Legion Quest. And here we're really kind of picking up about what they're going to do with him. So Magneto has gathered up his X-Men here, and they are going to be discussing about what their next move is. Look at this is Morph right here. I just realized that. He's like handsome dude looking in this picture. But on here you got Morph, and he's doing Sabretooth's face. So Morph being established as the comedic character on here. And most of you probably know that Morph started out as a character that was meant to just be killed on the X-Men animated show. And I guess there was enough popularity or whatever that they brought him into this event. So his first comics appearance, other than the X-Men Adventures comic, was X-Men Alpha. And this is the first time we really kind of get him being used on an X team in the, I guess, the real continuity, although this is an alternate reality of sorts. I like this team shot of everybody. I like how Iceman is kind of stuck to the wall right here. It's almost as if he used his power. If something's cold on one side of a wall, it can make the other side freeze. And it's almost like he used his power to like shift through the wall or to stick to it. And in this Age of Apocalypse, we're going to see Iceman be a little more fluid with his ice powers. And that was an interesting take. Quicksilver looking kind of the same, right? Storm looking significantly different with the short hair, the eye marking, which Nightcrawler has that too. You can't see it in this picture, but we saw it in the X-Men Alpha issue. We see Magneto's long hair in this, differentiate him from the standard looking Magneto since his costume is pretty much the same. Banshee with his like wild like wing things here. Now I will say I always thought Banshee's powers, like his wings that he had, were to catch the sound waves coming up, and that's kind of what made him fly. But maybe that's what was intended when he was created, but they didn't stick to that always. Sabretooth always looks cool too here, and Joe Mad doing a great job with his big hands and big feet look of these characters. And we're going to get all of our names to establish who they are. So if you're jumping on to X-Men for the first time, which a lot of people did, a lot of people were into comics already, but maybe they hadn't been reading X-Men, and they're like, I'm going to check out this Age of Apocalypse thing and see what it's all about. And a lot of this issue is just like establishing the team. There's not a ton of action going on in it, but we're going to see Magneto pondering how to strike. I shouldn't say strike at Apocalypse. They've been fighting this war against Apocalypse for a long time, and he's wanting to take kind of a different approach, which is to listen to Bishop and dispatch the teams. And throughout the dialogue of this issue, we really just see him saying like, oh, we're sending Gambit off to do this. We're sending Colossus and Kitty off to Seattle to do that. And this is the Astonishing team is kind of putting together for their purpose. So we have our character Blink, who I mistakenly said that her first appearance was X-Men Alpha. I forgot that she appeared and died in the Phalanx Covenant, and they brought her back for this event. This really made her like super popular though. So much so that after this event is over, I would say part of the legacy is this character had to come back somehow. So they brought her back in Exiles book, which I never read, and people loved it. Blink is opening her teleportation thing. She's falling through, and everybody's like, what are you doing teleporting directly into the mansion? Because they're at Charles Xavier's mansion. You're going to give away our location. And she was like, it was a dire thing, we had to. And you see this flaming thing coming through, and this is Sunfire, who looks awesome in the Age of Apocalypse. So he falls through. Storm's using her powers to, clear up the flames because his powers are out of control. These ads. And this is awesome where Magneto is using his powers to create a hand out of the scrap metal to grab Sunfire to calm him down and get his powers under control. And Iceman, meanwhile, is also using his powers around, and they pointed out in the dialogue, look at our breath. It's not his powers that are subsiding, it's the cold air around him caused by Iceman, who has a smirk on his face as he said, somebody needs to look through the portal over there. And you get this dude popping through the portal. Look at this as a Joe Mad face. Look at that mouth. That is a huge mouth. It's almost as big as his whole head. So this guy starts coming through the portal, and some dialogue here is kind of silly about like Blink, or about him asking Blink how she feels about leading them there and that they're all going to die. And she says, sorry guys, and see ya. And when her eyes sparkle up like that, which he points out to Blink, your eye glowing. No, you're closing the portal. That is some old school, tell me what's happening dialogue right there. I think we could have figured it out that she was triggering her powers right here, right? And splooch, I imagine this cut the dude in half, but it almost makes it look like he exploded or something, because there looks like part of his hand. I wonder if something was like scrubbed out of that, of the way it was originally drawn or intended to be drawn. More just worry here about what was going on, about them maybe being found out. Now we get to cut to Apocalypse, and I complained about Apocalypse's first look in the X-Men Alpha. So let's take a look at him here. This big building too, which looks like a horn or something. It's like rising out of Manhattan. So I don't know what the significance of the shape of this citadel is for Apocalypse. Everything has to happen in New York. And we meet Rex Delgado, who is reporting about how he knew that Blink would portal over, and that the guy would try to get through, but they would close it and everything. That guy got sacrificed that was there. But look at Apocalypse here. This is a much more menacing and kind of frightening image of Apocalypse in this first issue. And There's some corny dialogue here too about like, my lord, your face, what's wrong? Nothing, Rex. It's a smile. Nice like half face here. Again, the way Joe Mad does eyebrows, it's just like a line going up, angular line with the semicircle underneath. But I think this is much more menacing. This is a better way to introduce Apocalypse into the age of Apocalypse than that kind of cartoony looking thing we saw over in X-Men Alpha. So they're going to be doing some doctoring up of Shiro here, and look who comes in, Mr. Suave Gambit. Now we already saw that Rogue has a baby with Magneto in X-Men Alpha. But now we're going to establish that Remy and Rogue still kind of have a past, much like they had in the standard continuity, although Rogue is married to Magneto in this case. And we learn that Magneto and Gambit were once best friends, as she says here. I'm married to your best friend and have a child with him. And they're having their moment because he's being sent off to do something. When Blink shows up with the baby, kind of like, hey, remember your baby with your father or his father, your husband? And Gambit has a thing, are you happy, Petite? Not while you're still alive. Good news, Den. Because it don't look like I'm going to be that way for too much longer. And he jumps away in like kind of a, almost a video game moment. So establishing that Gambit's kind of on the outside of this X-Men group. He has his own group, but Magneto has called in a favor of his best friend to do, and the other X-Men don't really care for him too much, other than Rogue, who still kind of has an affinity. Awesome shot of Magneto here moping. This looks like it would have been Storm's room in the standard continuity. Great, like, close-up of his eyes with Nightcrawler's eyes appearing here. And then they just have a discussion more or less about, is it the right thing to do? Believe Bishop. And Magneto has an interesting line here. Trust me when I say that I am less afraid of Bishop being a hoax than I am that he represents the truth. Because he kind of saw what his life as a villain would have been like. And there's the recap of him, Xavier dying in his arms and stuff. So what I glossed over before is where Blink and Sunfire were coming from. There was a culling of humans. There was some kind of agreement with Eurasia that Apocalypse would stop these cullings, and he was doing it anyway. And they're going to stop a culling, and they're kind of saying like, this is a suicide mission. There's no way your group is going to be able to stop a culling by one of the horsemen whose name is Holocaust that we saw in X-Men Alpha briefly. And we get a hint that Sabretooth used to work with Holocaust. Me and the kid used to run with Holocaust at some point. So you're getting like little hints of backstory of how this world developed post Xavier's death. I almost feel like you get more out of this than you did X-Men Alpha. Magneto comes in with Sunfire. They're just forming their team. They have a heart-to-heart moment with Quicksilver, his son, but it turns out it's not really Magneto. It's Morph, and he's playing a joke, which of course annoys Quicksilver at first. But then they show that Rogue and Quicksilver almost have a brother-sister vibe going on. I guess I shouldn't say that because she's married to his dad, but they definitely have a close bond here between the two of them, as it shows with them kind of laughing off Morph's levity. Morph keeps things light in this apocalyptic world. Those gigantic cartoony lips. I don't know where they got this ship. I don't recall this event ever really explaining like how the X-Men have some of the technology they have. In the comics, it made sense that like first Xavier was funding it, and then of course they got Shi'ar technology. But in this, it doesn't really explain all that because they didn't do the M'Kraan crystal, the Dark Phoenix saga. That none of that stuff happened with this group of X-Men. So some of that should be touched upon. Maybe they did it in some of those like retcon Age of Apocalypse stories, but as best I could tell is maybe some of that should have been addressed. There's definitely universal things that the X-Men contributed to that would have been different. Like Secret Wars, for instance. Would Secret Wars have happened in this Age of Apocalypse world? Would the Beyonder have come and taken characters away to have his little contest of good and evil? I don't know. So they don't really trust Bishop, most of them. And Bishop is even kind of like, why are they doing this? Why are they going on this suicide mission? And Quicksilver's basically saying, because we're X-Men, more or less. So first issue, I liked the start of this. This is probably one of my favorite series, is the Astonishing X-Men, partly because of the Joe Mad art, but I also think it tells one of the better stories of the whole event. The other book that came out this week is X-Man. Now, this was Cable. Um, this book was the rebranding of Cable. And I remember being more interested in this book than most of the others too, because it was just, what are you going to do with the Cable character? And I think they found a pretty good way to do it. I like this cover a lot. Steve Scrose, is it Scrose or Scrosey? I always say Scrose, but Steve Scrose, this was my introduction to him as an artist, and I liked him enough to where I followed him on. Now, if you're familiar with him, he goes on to work on like The Matrix and other movies and stuff, but he dives back into comics every once in a while. But this was my introduction to him. I'm not sure what he worked on quite before this. Ian Churchill was doing the Cable series as I looked at one of the Legion Quest issues. So the Age of Apocalypse begins now. Notice that it doesn't have this same branding. And I think all the rest of the Age of Apocalypse have this like badge, but this one does not. And that may foreshadow what they do with the end of it. So let's just jump on in. And we start with like a vision of sorts of Cyclops saying, "Come with me if you want to live." Very Terminator style is how that line always feels. And you have this young character being like led out through what appears to be some kind of like sewer system of sorts. And he's having a breakout, and it's going back and forth between like what's reality here and the vision versus reality and the vision. The coloring choices are interesting there. So this character breaks away, our X-Man that we don't know his name yet, and then he finds himself outside the X-Mansion, but you can tell it's the vision thing again happening, because he's he's like full color and the rest of the world is monotone around him. And he sees Magneto having a conversation with Bishop. Notice the sideways panels too. I wonder if that was kind of a choice. It doesn't turn sideways or something, but for these two pages, we have like sideways, but then this one jumps back. I don't think it works in the 2-page spread like this, because it just jumps back. And then we meet this character who looks menacing in himself with this like hood on, kind of like I would call that like a villain's goatee almost a villain's goatee almost, and a cybernetic eye and these like crazy claws for hands. He's pretty wild. Back at Magneto's, he sees that the boy in the mirror, and then he's gone, and he wonders, is it the stress of what's going on, or an apparition of something that was really there? So now we get to find out who all these characters are. Our main character's name is Nate Gray, and Nathan Summers, but in this case he's going to be Nathan Gray or Nate Gray. But we get Toad, Mastermind, Sauron, Brute, and Forge. This is Forge. What a wild depiction of Forge. I think of a lot of the Age of Apocalypse characters, it's like they look pretty familiar. Like we just looked at the Astonishing X-Men. Quicksilver looked basically the same. Iceman's, tweaked because his powers, the way he uses them are a little different, but Sabretooth is very recognizable. Storm, for the most part, is recognizable. Sunfire was pretty dramatic, but I think Forge is one of the more dramatic changes of character other than, I mean, I guess Cable here is this, but this isn't really Cable as we go along and we find out, but it's just the Cable spinoff of the series. So he was like kind of having like his own psionic trance or meditation, and look what it did around him. And Forge is being very protective of him in this book. That's kind of the sense you're getting, is Forge is almost like his adopted father, but he's overprotective at the same time and trying to get him to ease into his powers. And he's almost like a teenager that just wants to cut loose, or maybe like around 20 or so. And it's a neat setup that they're kind of like a little traveling performers or actors. They put on like shows and stuff, and they use Mastermind to kind of conceal that they're really mutants because they're unregistered. And you got these guys wanting to know more about them. It's, you get these guys dressed kind of in Victorian-ish clothes with but with more modern weapons, and they're asking these questions about who are you and where are you from to a guy with a cybernetic eye and stuff. Now, he may not look like this to them because of Mastermind, when all of a sudden they get a Jedi mind trick pulled on them by Nate, and Forge isn't happy about it. Good shot of Nate in his full costume here. Other than the cover, we get his costume there, but inside, nice shot of how he's going to be dressed in his, I wouldn't really say it's just his clothes, really. It's not like his superhero gear. It's just the clothes he wears. Cut back to Cyclops, who opened the issue. Here's our crazy horn structure again. And another great opening shot of Apocalypse. This is so much better than what we saw in Alpha #1. I mean, this is an awesome shot of Apocalypse. And he's saying that Sinister has deserted him. He's fled. His laboratory is in shambles, and I fear he's turned against you. And Apocalypse is kind of like, you fear it? This was to be expected. A man like someone in my position is always going to have challengers, and I actually pity Sinister because it's pointless, is what he's saying. And then you get the Shadow King over here too. So Shadow King, played a big part with Xavier once upon a time in Storm's background, but now we're going to get him messing with Nate Gray here. And he mentions a telepath, and Apocalypse takes a lot of this stuff lightly. Like, nothing's really alarming to Apocalypse. He thinks he's got everything under control. And as Cyclops wanders off down the hall, you see him saying, I need to find this telepath. It just might help me in my plans. So Cyclops also kind of working against Apocalypse here. So typical villains and their team ups, they can never team up because they're always going to be working against each other of some sort. Now, what they're really establishing here is that while Cyclops has probably grown up and been raised in this environment of Apocalypse, really with Sinister, he, at his core, he's still going to be a good person in Scott Summers. That's kind of what they're setting up. We get the Age of Apocalypse Domino, who's sent out to find this telepath and, of course, kill him. And she's like, sure thing, boss. She looks pretty cool in her all red outfit and the red patch on her eye. Meanwhile, there's like a town that almost looks like Latveria, but it's somewhere in the States, or what's left of America, with the Infinites terrorizing this town. And we meet a man who says he's gonna protect his daughter Teresa, and he'll die before they take you. And then in the shadows, we see him getting his head crushed, and she's like, no. And they're being led up for one of these cullings. Now, that's kind of what we hear about in the Astonishing X-Men. There was human cullings going on, and that's what Rogue and Morph and Sabretooth and Blink and Sunfire were going off to try to stop, as one of these cullings. These are not Sentinels. These are these Infinites, which I'm not clear. Are they robots? Are they mutants? Are they genetically engineered just things in suits? That's never quite clear. And I think they do that on purpose so that they can kind of slaughter them if they have to. But in this kill or be killed world, I don't know that matters. This is the kind of stuff I really like. Steve Scrooge. Look at those heavy blacks on the shadow of her face as she's been captured. Cut to Nate whispering with Forge. He wants to help Forge do whatever it is Forge does. And they're like, or stopping these like cattle cars that are full of humans for these cullings. And that's kind of what they do. They're almost like vigilantes outside of both the X-Men and Apocalypse that are they just do their little counter strikes here and there. It's pretty neat. Sauron dropping a bomb to derail the train. Brute comes in to fight him. You get the Infinites coming in. They're just going to go ahead and kill all the humans right then and there. And awesome display of his powers here. Steve Scrooge really showing off with this 2-page spread. I mean, this looks great. Look at the way his powers are. That's not Kirby Crackle. They're angled in such a way that they almost look like little like blades slicing through. This explosion in the chest. That's what I'm saying. You can't say, are these people or robots? If you keep it vague and unclear, then you can, in your mind, say, these are robots. They're just destroying robots. But they have muscles and stuff like people. So is he killing a person? Maybe he is, maybe he isn't. But love this page here. And then you get this girl, Teresa, and she's Siren. And she blasts them there too. But she's never done it before. She says she's never done that, and it causes her to pass out. And then our band of mutants here, they're going to slip off into the darkness. Nate says we're bringing the girl with him. He's like, hey, girl my age, we're bringing her. And Forge doesn't have the energy to fight with him because Sauron got hurt in all this right there. Got his wing blown off. And so they decide to get on the road. They're on like a horse and buggy, like an old carnival show. When they meet this man on the road with a lantern who calls himself Essex, and I think I can be of some help to you folks. And he's definitely got the little diamond-shaped thing of Sinister there. So we know Sinister's fled, and here he is. Quick look at the map of the Age of Apocalypse. This is in all these first issues, and it may continue, so you kind of get an idea of who controls what. This Eurasia area is controlled by humans. We'll dive more into that in another book. I don't think South America we really spend too much time. It's radioactive, though. Radioactive over here too. And then here's your United States that's carved up by the Four Horsemen and Apocalypse himself and Sinister. So kind of neat how the world has changed. And again, the rest of the Marvel Universe is carrying on as normal during this. It's just the X-Men that are changing it. So there's week 1. We'll come back next week with week 2 as we go through this kind of real-time revisiting of the Age of Apocalypse for its 30th anniversary. Until next time, read your comics. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed my breakdown of this issue, you can support the channel by hitting subscribe. It costs you nothing and helps other comic fans find the channel. You can also visit readyourcomics.com for cool merch, like this. Read Your Comics isn't just a brand, it's a mantra. And when you wear a Read Your Comics shirt, you are helping spread the word. For more classic comics conversation, be sure to follow me on Instagram at read.your.comics. And if you're still here, why not watch one of my older videos? Here or here.